Welcome. Today I'm going to tell you the story of Harry, a man who thought moving into a quiet house would bring him peace, only to discover that darkness lurks behind every wall, and that the house hides unimaginably terrifying secrets. Get ready, because this story will make your heart race and your mind wonder if what's happening is real or a nightmare. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, to be the first to discover upcoming horror stories. I'm a 37-year-old man, and I've never been one to run after the hustle and bustle of life. I've never been a fan of crowds, parties, or chattery. Since childhood, I've found comfort in silence, and I find myself gravitating toward dark corners that people usually avoid. I seek out those places where the noise disappears, where all you hear is your heartbeat and your breathing, and where the world feels so far removed from what's going on inside you. Perhaps that's why I've seemed strange to some. Some call me introverted, others describe me as a cold man. But whatever the labels, it didn't affect me. I found my peace in solitude, as my own personal sanctuary in a world plagued by loud noises. My ex-wife was everything I was not. A woman whose presence was unmistakable. Wherever she went, her laughter was heard, her movements were noticed, and her energy made you feel small and invisible. She enjoyed everything I avoided: noisy meetings, guests, loud music, late-night chats, and endless lights. That wasn't necessarily bad, but for me, it was suffocating. Over time, I began to feel like I was living in a never-ending storm, all while I was searching for a moment of calm. Our disagreements accumulated, at first, small remarks, fleeting words, then long discussions, then silences filled with resentment and unspoken words. Each of us lived in separate worlds within the same house, as if we were neighbors held together by only walls. When the divorce took place, I didn't see it as a painful ending. On the contrary, it was something like salvation. I felt like I was breathing for the first time in years. I left the house of my own free will. I may have had the legal right to stay there, but my desire for peace was stronger than any court paperwork. I couldn't bear to start over in the same place where I'd been suffocating. I left. Alone, but with a heart that no one could believe was at peace. I began looking for a new home, but not just one. I wanted it to be a place like a sanctuary, far from people, far from noise, far from even the possibility of being disturbed. I didn't want a small apartment in a crowded city, nor an average-sized house in the middle of a neighborhood full of nosy neighbors. I wanted to disappear silently. After a long search, I found it. A large, beautiful old-style house, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to stand silent sentries around it. The road leading to it was narrow and winding, as if it were meant to be hidden from view. There were no nearby neighbors, no car noise, just the gentle murmur of the wind mixed with the sounds of birds or the rustling of dry plants moving on their own. What surprised me even more than its beauty was its price. It was incredibly cheap. Far below its value. It was as if the owner wanted to get rid of it at any cost. I didn't ask much. Maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe I was willing to turn a blind eye to anything for the tranquility I'd long dreamed of. In my heart was a childish certainty that I finally had a place that felt like me. That was, before I realized that the relief I felt was just the first taste, and that behind every beautiful thing hides a dark door that only opens when you're alone enough, and silent enough, to hear the things that shouldn't be heard. But I didn't know that this decision would be the beginning of a slow descent into an abyss I never imagined existed. When I received the keys to the new house, I felt something resembling euphoria, a strange feeling, like suddenly owning a piece of the world to myself, as if you had escaped the chaos of humanity and entered a secluded land where only your heart could be heard. I stood in front of the front door, the rain pouring over my head, while the house stood before me amidst tall trees that resembled natural walls surrounding it on all sides. The path leading to the main door looked like a natural tunnel of branches and dry leaves that creaked beneath my feet with every step, as if the earth was welcoming me in a special way. From the outside, the house looked like an old painting. High, gloomy gray walls, tall windows with dark wooden frames, and a steep roof covered with moss and dry grass, an architectural style reminiscent of old, abandoned European houses. I felt a dual feeling inside, a genuine amazement at its strange beauty, and at the same time, a hidden awe, as if I were standing before something beautiful but hiding a heavy secret it didn't want to reveal. I entered. The smell of old wood mixed with a hint of dust and mold greeted me with a deeper intensity than I expected. The silence was eerily pervasive, even my own breathing sounded harsh to my ears. I placed my bag on the floor and walked slowly between the rooms. The first hall was spacious, with a high ceiling, and the wooden floor creaked with every step, a sound like an alarm or a warning. The furniture was still in place, as if the previous family had left in the middle of the night without taking anything. Chairs with cracked edges, a heavy dining table covered in a layer of dust, a large bookcase containing a few books in a language I didn't understand, mostly titles in Latin and French, and topics on history, religions, and ancient talismans. But the thing that caught my attention most of all, that mirror at the end of the hallway. A giant mirror, framed in aged gold wood, blackened as if time had eaten away half of its color. I felt my reflection in it was clearer than normal, as if the glass wasn't content with merely reflecting my image, but was also watching me, memorizing my movements, waiting for something I couldn't understand. For a moment, I felt that the mirror wasn't just a piece of furniture, but an open, unblinking eye. As night fell, the flame of true solitude ignited for the first time inside this house. I sat on the large chair in the heart of the living room, a hot cup of tea beside me, and closed my eyes for a moment, breathing deeply into the stillness. I'd been searching for this silence all my life, but suddenly I felt it was a different silence, the kind that doesn't feel comfortable, but rather makes you realize you're being watched. A silence that carries within it the possibility that something is listening to you at this moment. About half an hour later, a faint sound echoed from upstairs. At first, it sounded like something being dragged across the floor, slowly and heavily. I opened my eyes immediately, my body taut like a string. I tried to come up with a logical explanation, perhaps the old wood expanding in the cold, or the wind stirring something upstairs. But the sound returned again, clearer this time, like footsteps. Human footsteps walking slowly, cautiously, directly above my head. I stood unconsciously, my gaze fixed on the ceiling. Footsteps were clearly audible, moving toward the place directly above me. My heart began to pound, but inside I refused to acknowledge the fear. I advanced toward the stairs, trying to understand what I was hearing. The overhead lamp flickered on and off, as if breathing heavily, and with each step I ascended, I could hear the floor creaking beneath my feet, until I realized the footsteps above stopped the same moment I began to ascend. When I finally reached the top floor, I found the corridor darker than I had expected, even though I was certain the windows there had been open during my first tour. The air was much heavier, and the smell was like damp mold mixed with old water. I found nothing. All the rooms were closed, all the doors covered in dust. No sign of anyone. Just a thick silence, as if the place was waiting for me to take another step. I decided to go down. The moment I passed the mirror again, I swore I saw him, a pale face behind me. His features weren't clear, but I saw something standing behind me, for just a second, before it disappeared from the reflection. My body shuddered, my throat went dry, and something inside me told me I wasn't alone, that maybe this house wasn't as empty as I'd thought. I pressed my eyelids tightly to deny what I'd seen, but when I opened my eyes again, it was nothing but my own reflection, spitting fear back at me like something was coming out of my eyes. I went back to the living room and turned off all the lights, hoping to sleep and start over in the morning. But sleep didn't visit me that night. I sat there listening to the silence, a silence that no longer offered the reassurance I'd imagined. Instead, it was like a vast trap, waiting just for me to make a single mistake, before it closed in on me. Every morning I woke up in that new house, trying to convince myself that I was living the peaceful life I'd always dreamed of. I'd open my eyes and look up at the antique wooden ceiling, take a deep breath, and say to myself, "This is the peace I've been looking for." But the truth was that something weighed heavily on the atmosphere around me. Something invisible, yet present. The silence wasn't normal. It was more like a suffocating emptiness, filled with an inaudible sound, as if the walls were hiding a deep secret but refusing to reveal it. A few days passed at this pace, as I sipped my morning coffee and walked slowly through the long corridors, trying to enjoy my solitude. Yet I felt as if there was an eye, somewhere, watching my steps without my seeing it. I wasn't afraid yet, but the sense of comfort wasn't entirely real. On the first night after a full week of settling in, I sat in the living room reading a book I'd started years ago. The clock was approaching midnight, and the house was immersed in such a heavy silence that even the rustling of the pages sounded like a loud noise. Suddenly, I heard something like light footsteps upstairs. I raised my head abruptly, and my heart began to beat unexplainably fast. I told myself, the wood is expanding. The wind is moving the windows. This is normal. I tried to ignore it and went back to reading. But the footsteps didn't stop. They repeated slowly, regularly, with a certain insistence, as if someone barefoot were wandering up there. I closed the book and stood up, hesitantly climbing the stairs, feeling the darkness upstairs thicker than it should have been. I checked the rooms one by one. All of them empty. No sign of anything. Yet, I felt the place wasn't completely empty, as if something had disappeared seconds before I arrived. I went downstairs again, trying to sound calm, but suddenly I heard a faint whisper, very close to my ear. I couldn't make out what was said, but the voice was so close that I could feel the cold breath on my neck. I turned around quickly, and there was no one. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard vague sounds, as if someone was breathing very slowly at the edge of the bed. At one point, I imagined the blanket moved slightly without my touching it, as if someone had held it for a moment and then let go. I opened my eyes suddenly, turned on the lamp, and saw a black shadow standing in the corner of the room, featureless and motionless. I blinked for less than a second, and it was gone. The next day, I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination caused by stress or loneliness, or perhaps the accumulated psychological effects of the divorce and moving away from the city. But something in the house began to change visibly. The air felt colder than usual at odd times, even when the weather was mild outside. The doors sometimes opened and closed slowly, as if someone were pushing them gently, but no one was there. A musty, damp smell began to appear suddenly in the hallway in the middle of the night, then vanished as if it had never been. Some nights, while I was upstairs, I began to hear a chuckle coming from downstairs, a very faint laugh, but it was there, as if someone enjoyed my presence here. I hesitated a lot before admitting the truth to myself. This house doesn't look like any normal house. It's hiding something that doesn't want me to rest, as if it's testing me, waiting for my moment of weakness, to start something worse. That night, I was exhausted in a way I'd never felt before. I spent the entire day trying to ignore the strange sounds coming from the walls and the shadows that quickly passed over the edges of my vision whenever I turned my head. Taking a deep breath, I said to myself, enough. Maybe it's all due to lack of sleep, due to my body and mind being tired together. I locked all the doors in the house, turned off the lights, and then entered my room like someone trying to escape the world. I locked the door tightly and ran to the bed as if searching for a warm embrace to protect me. The room was dark, but a little moonlight filtered through the curtains, revealing only the edges of things in the form of faint, incomprehensible shadows. I convinced myself that I needed a deep sleep, just a few hours of surrender, and then everything would be back to normal. I lay down. Seconds passed, and then I felt the mattress shift slightly, as if someone else had laid down beside me without making a sound. I opened my eyes and looked beside me. I saw nothing. But my heart began to beat at an incredible speed, and I felt cold breaths close to my face. I tried to get up and turn on the light, But suddenly, something fell on my chest, something very heavy. My breathing became difficult, and the air in my chest was cut off. I was staring at the ceiling, my eyes wide open. My entire body was paralyzed. I couldn't move a finger. The sounds of my heart echoed in my ears like terrifying drums. Then came the voice. A low whisper, disturbingly close to my ear, as if the creature's mouth was touching my cheek. "You are not alone." I felt terror in every cell of my body. I tried to scream, but my mouth made no sound. My eyes moved with difficulty, slowly, until they stopped at the edge of the bed. And there I saw him. A tall shadow, too tall for a normal human. No features, no facial details, just a black mass of solid smoke, standing frozen, watching me. Suddenly, I felt very cold, thin fingers slowly creeping up my neck, as if testing the texture of my skin. I felt them pressing against my throat, and my body trembled as I tried to move, but to no avail. The entity's voice grew closer. I could hear its very cold exhalation, as if snow was being blown into my ear. Seconds passed, which felt like hours. I thought I would die at that moment. Then a sharp chill came from my feet. I tried to look down, and I saw a long, black hand emerging quietly from under the bed. The fingers were thin, sharp, like nails, moving slowly as if searching, groping the ground, getting closer and closer. The entire house was plunged into darkness. Even the moonlight had disappeared, as if something outside had deliberately covered the window. I could hear slow footsteps circling around the bed, a step, a pause, a step, a pause, until they stopped right at my head. And suddenly, a laugh. A cracked, torn laugh, as if something burned was trying to laugh for the first time in centuries. The laughter came from somewhere very close, perhaps from within the pillow itself. With my last bit of strength, I raised my trembling hand and hit the side lamp, and the light came on. The light finally filled the room, but the room wasn't empty. On the wooden chair opposite the bed sat a being. A semi-human corpse, long fingers planted on the armrests of the chair, a very gaunt body, skin as pale as ash-stained bones, eyes completely white, without eyelids, staring directly at me. His mouth was set in a wide smile that couldn't be human, and long, sharp teeth protruded from within. He didn't move his head, didn't blink, didn't breathe. He just stared at me. I kept staring at him in horror, and everything inside me froze. And suddenly, the lamp went out on its own, as if someone had blown on it. Darkness filled again, and something approached my face, breathing in my face, and I heard its mysterious voice. "Now, you understand why I came." After that night, I could no longer distinguish between reality and nightmare. Every tiny sound began to unsettle me. Every shadow moving in front of me made my heart leap out of my chest. I began to notice a change in the house, not just in the building itself, but in the atmosphere around me. The air felt heavier, the smell different, as if the place itself was breathing in an unnatural way. One night, I sat in the living room on the large chair, holding a cup of tea that had quickly cooled, looking into the huge mirror in the hallway. For a moment, I felt something watching me. It wasn't just a reflection, but something mysterious, dark, disappearing with the slightest quick movement only to return when my eyes calmed down. I tried to ignore it, but my heart told me I was no longer alone. The sound of footsteps returned again, but this time it was coming from downstairs. I shuddered, grabbed a small lamp, and moved cautiously toward the stairs. Every step made by the old wood of the floor echoed in the air filled with fear. When I looked down, I saw no one, but a strange shadow moved in the corner of the hall, as if hiding from me but always watching. I sat on the floor, trying to calm down. Maybe it's all exhaustion, or loneliness, or my imagination, I told myself. But the muffled laughter I heard moments later confirmed that something else was at play. A slow, sharp laugh, seeping between the walls as if feeding on my fear. That night, I crept into my room, but before I could close the door, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I turned around quickly, but saw nothing. Everything was still, except my heart heard something else, something faint but clear, whispers close to my ear saying, "It's not over yet. It will never be over." I began to dream of the same place every night, the same hall, the same mirror, and a dark shadow standing behind me, getting closer and closer. Every time I tried to scream or run away, I would wake up to find myself in my bed, my body drenched in sweat, my eyes searching for the shadow I couldn't see, but it was there, always there. As the days passed, I began to notice more and more strange changes, objects moving on their own, books on shelves falling, doors opening and closing for no reason, and the cold air becoming more intense in the middle of the night. I could no longer sit in any room alone, even the kitchen became a place that terrified me. One night, as I listened to the silence of the room, I felt something creeping behind me. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a real shadow, very tall, following my every step. I tried to escape upstairs, but everything I did felt like I was drowning in mud. My steps were heavy, and every movement I made slowed down, as if the house itself were preventing me from getting away. Then it appeared, in front of the mirror again. This shadow, this creature, had no discernible face, but it emanated a feeling of absolute brutality. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I couldn't move. All I did was look at it, watching it take a step closer, then another, until it was so close, I could feel the chill running through my veins. That's when I heard his voice for the first time. He whispered slowly, "You are now part of this house, and you will never leave it again." Since that day, I have ceased to sleep. Everything around me has become a heavy burden. Even the light makes me feel frightened, and the shadow seems alive. Sometimes I wake up to find myself in places I never remembered entering, as if the house itself were moving for me, drawing me into its dark corners. I began to suffer from constant nightmares, and each dream brought me back to the same room, the same mirror, the same shadow, and each time it drew closer, whispering my name, reminding me that I was no longer alone, that my house was no longer mine. One night, while I was sleeping, I felt something touch my face, staring into my eyes, its cold hand reaching for my chest. I tried to move, tried to scream, but my body was paralyzed. Then it whispered in my ear again, "You will not survive, because you have become a part of me."